Resch said that this is designed so that the second turn of Serbien Muss Sterbien, game turn 1, matches up with the chronology of game turn 1 from his other game, Offensive Ultrans, I think. So game turn 0 represents effectively the first week of the Austrian invasion before anything else is happening elsewhere in the European theatres. Thus, this game turn 0 aligns with the historic Austro-Hungarian invasion of Serbia, which happened on the 12th of August. At the start of this scenario, the Serbians have a few forces stretched out along the frontier. They are inactive on that initial Serbian turn. You can see they're marked by all those red dots. And the bulk of the Serbian divisions are out in the east or the southeast. You can see those off to the far right of this image. And so the first thing the Serbians are basically doing on game turn 0, their first turn of the game, is moving those activated forces in the southeast west as fast as they can. And to do so, I'm trying to use the lowest movement terrain costs that I can, moving through those easier terrain, avoiding the hills and the rough terrain, which I'll show you in more detail in just a moment. Now, because I know that a lot of the fighting will take place out in the west, I'm moving the Serbian third corps train out to the northwest away from the supply depot to be able to supply those forces out on the frontier. And I've also reattached some units from the second into the third. It's just going out of shot now. That means that they'll be supplied by that third corps train, which will be close to the front, which means that they can fight in around that front line. And a reminder also that during this movement phase, all active units have a movement allowance of 9 movement points, and they can use infantry can use forced march to gain an extra 3. Cavalry units can gain an extra 7, but they do have to make a combat efficiency check to do so. In just a moment, I'll show you the situation at the end of this first Serbian turn of game turn 0. Okay, at the end of game turn 0, Serbian forces are pretty much quickly just rushing out to the west, using pretty much the cheapest available terrain. So they're moving through this upland terrain, which only costs 2 movement points. Sometimes they have to cross some rough. Also moving the corps trains out to the west out here, preparing to confront the Austrian forces, which will sweep somewhere through here. A lot of the Serbians start out in the east, just south of Belgrade, and there's no point in them being around here, so yeah, rushing out to the west. That's about all that is happening on this game turn 0. Now, after the active player gets to move all their forces up to 9 movement points each, the opposing player gets what's called a counter movement phase, and each of their units can move 5 movement points. Now, unfortunately, in this game turn 0, there's little the Austrians can do. It's quite expensive. There are movement costs to move adjacent to within enemy zones of control. It's +2. A lot of this mountainous terrain makes it very difficult to move. It's +1 to cross a contour line and so forth. So effectively, as you'll see in a moment, the Austro-Hungarians are just sort of inching, often just 1 hex closer to the Serbians. And in the Austrian counter-movement phase, there's not a lot they can do. Just they've only got 5 movement points, so they're just shifting that a little bit closer towards those Serbian forces, mainly down there in the southwest near Zvornik, just crossing the Drina and looking to outflank those Serbian units there. Otherwise, they don't have the movement points to do much else up in the north, the northeast. Now, the phasing player can, of course, do combats, launch attacks on their turn. The Serbians weren't really in a position to do much, and so they didn't launch any attacks. However, then the opposing player gets their chance to launch counterattacks. And of course, the Austrians are keen to take advantage of this opportunity, and they launch their first attack of the campaign near the Drina River down here in the southwest. It was successful and forced a retreat, allowing the Austrians to cross the river and advance down that Jada River.
And with the Serbian game turn 0 complete, it goes over to the Austro-Hungarians, who take their game turn 0. And one of the first things they do is their movement phase, and they now have 9 movement points. They can cross that Drina a bit more effectively, begin to move into the mountains, and as you'll see in a moment, attempt to outflank and harass those fairly weak Serbian brigades and regiments out on the frontier.
And here we have the result of the first Austrian movement on game turn 0. So you can see a few things happening around here. So this 13th Corps is moving to outflank this Serbian brigade Loznica. They'll all attack here, this 13th Corps units, and they will have zones of control, these attacking units, in 5 of the 6 hexes surrounding this unit. Not this one, but they don't need 6, just 5, which will give them the flanking bonus. And a similar situation happening here. This unit, you don't count its zones of control, but you count the hex it occupies. So we've got 1, and then the attacking units here, these 2, from the 8th Corps, will attack Loznica, and they'll have their zone of control, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 occupied by a non-attacking unit. So this one doesn't count, but again, that's the 6th, don't need that. And they've crossed over here to the north, but this is really their focus, trying to clear out these Serbian defenders in front of the Chur mountain here. If they can clear them out, do some damage, they're hoping they'll be able to move into this sort of upland clear terrain to the northeast.
And I mentioned in my how to play videos, during the movement phase, the active player can place prepared attack markers by paying movement costs equal to the space they'll move in. It's really important because it prevents the defender from moving out, and in cases where all attackers have these prepared attack markers, they gain a column shift, so that's well worth doing.
Okay, so here we are just at the start of the Austrian attack phase, just after the Serbian counter-movement phase. So the Serbians are trying to, again, still move to the west, but also shift their forces around the Chur mountain area. Those units on the far left, of course, are locked into combat because of the prepared attack markers. And now the Austrians have placed their attack markers. You can see what's going to happen in this area. Okay, so I've just done the Serbian retreat in this combat again. The Austrians rolled pretty well. I think they got a 5 white, 4 black, which gives them 5-4, that dash plus 4 retreat. With the modifier, it goes up to +3 with 1 retreat, which is good enough for the Austrians. So the Serbians retreat. With all this Austrian artillery, they add, I think it was +2 to their artillery dice roll modifier. They ended up exceeding their combat efficiency level, which thus increases the Loznica brigade by -1 combat effectiveness level, which is going to penalise them moving forward. The Austrians, 3 stacks attacking, so they rolled 3 times and they all passed quite easily. And now they get to advance, and I think they're going to advance these 2 brigades into there. That's it. That's the bottom combat, with the top combat still to come. Okay, so the Austrian attack up in the north went very well. They forced, in their combat roll, an effectiveness reduction on that Serbian asset. Now, it was already a quite weak 1 strength asset, and it couldn't take... When assets lose combat effectiveness, when they're not with a force, they instead suffer strength reductions, and this unit was so small that it couldn't suffer a strength reduction, and so was instead eliminated. It's one of the rare cases in this game where units are eliminated. Normally, large formations are just reduced and have strength reductions. It is rare for any unit to be eliminated, and I think the elimination of assets, small assets such as that unit, is a rare exception. So The path through to Chur Mountain is relatively open, but again, the Serbians are just to the southeast with their game turn 1 coming up, so they'll have the initiative to, seize the heights and, see what they can do to stop this Austrian advance across the Drina.
Okay, so game turn 1, which is effectively the second turn of the game, begins with the Serbians again rushing out towards the west. You can see now they've moved up the Chur Mountain, moving north towards the Sava River, and they've formed what looks like a pretty good line. But if you look quite closely, there are some strong formations mixed in with some weaker assets. And as I'll show you in a moment, it's these weaker assets that are targeted by the Austrians. And the Austrians at this stage are looking to poke some holes in the line, and they're really targeting, as you'll see in just a moment, targeting the Serbian flanks where they're a bit weaker. And again, the Austrian counter movement phase of the Serbian turn, because of the only the 5 movement point allowance, there isn't a lot they can do. You can see them shifting a little bit to the north, but in this low mountainous terrain with a +2 movement point cost to enter enemy zones of control, the Austrians are really a bit stuck at a distance from the Serbians, and they'll have to wait for the Austrian turn before they can advance on those Serbian defenders. So there's no combat in the Serbian phase. In the Austrian game turn 1, the Austrians, as you can see here, move in, and because they have a lot of movement points up their sleeve, they can afford to spend a number of prepared attacks again. In this case, it is both locking in the defenders, but also, as you can see, just about all those Austro-Hungarian attackers have prepared attacks. So in each individual combat, if all the attackers have those prepared attacks, they'll gain a 1 column shift to the right, which can be hugely beneficial to the attacker. And those combats go pretty well for the Austro-Hungarians. You can see them reducing an asset. If an asset is forced to suffer a combat effectiveness level reduction, it receives a strength reduction. When a formation receives a level reduction, a marker is placed on the organisational chart. They also punch some holes in that Serbian line and begin to advance through those gaps. Perhaps a bit hopeful, optimistic, but looking to surround some of those Serbian units. Now the Serbians respond to this with some effective counterattacks, particularly up in the north. They managed to force a strength reduction on the 21st Division of that Austro-Hungarian army. It's pretty painful for the Austro-Hungarians on game turn 1. Strength reductions are a bit rare. You need a really unlucky die roll, but the Serbians here brought a lot of force into this battle. You can see those 3 units surrounding it in the north and inflicted some pain on the Austrians. And during the Serbian turn again, they're reorganising the forces and again looking to punish the 21st Division through some prepared attacks. They're already reduced and reduced in strength and have a combat effectiveness level reduction, so they're a bit weaker in combat. And as you can see here, at the end of this combat, they're now down to -3 combat effectiveness. This reduces their CE level from a 10, -3, down to 7, which really reduces their morale, makes it much more difficult to engage in combat looking forward. Now, of course, the Austrians are on the offensive here. This is their invasion, and so even in their counterattack phase, they're looking for every little opportunity to punish the Serbians. They launch another attack way up in the north and another attack in the south. I mean, in both cases, I thought these would be quite strong attacks. I thought I was bringing quite strong formations against what I thought were weaker Serbian opponents. It didn't quite work out that way in both combats. Neither combat went in the Austrians' favour. The combat in the south, which I thought was against some weak assets, was a bit of a standoff. There was no result. I thought the Austrians would have won there. But in the north, the the Austrians suffered well, combat didn't go in their favour, certainly there were no retreat results, but that 21st Division, again, already reduced, already suffering -3, rolled a pretty poor combat effectiveness level check and suffered further reductions in their combat effectiveness. They were first reduced to combat ineffective and then reduced again to demoralization level 1 with a retreat of 2 hexes. So things going very poorly for that particular division. And so again, they were Austro-Hungarian counterattacks. In the Austrian game turn, they reshift their focus to the south and again look to bring what they hope will be overwhelming forces against these Serbians. They're not picking their battles very well in the north, so they're refocusing on the south. You can see up in the northwest, the 21st Division has really withdrawn. They're looking to recover combat effectiveness and bring on some of those marsh reinforcements. And again, unfortunately, the battle isn't going well for the Austro-Hungarians. 2 standoffs in those prepared attacks. Not much happening. There were no retreats and not much of an effect on the combat effectiveness levels of the participants in that fighting. Now you might also note that I've been really busy with the 5th Army. I've been pretty quiet with the Austro-Hungarian 2nd Army. They start north of the Sava River, and because of those penalties in crossing the Sava River, because so many Serbian forces start just in that area south of the Sava River, to be honest, I've been a bit afraid to have the Austro-Hungarians cross that Sava River. Instead, what I did, you may have noticed earlier, was I crossed with a force near Mitrovic. They crossed south, and they just moved just to the southeast to build those pontoon bridges, which you can see there. And that has now allowed the 31st Division to cross the Sava safely and now support the 29th Division in their attack south. I should also note that, anticipating that I'll do this, I also shifted during the attachment phase the 31st Division from the 4th Corps over to the 8th Corps. So they're now supplied by the 8th Corps train, and that 8th Corps is still within their attachment limit. The 4th Corps now has been released, but again, it is difficult for them to do much. I may have to get them more heavily involved in the fighting to the southwest, because that 8th Corps is really struggling to make any advance. Okay, so in the last turn before the end of this phase, before what's known as the interphase, the Serbians are pretty happy in their position, and there's not a lot of movement taking place. Instead, what they do is down the very southwest, they do what's known as a combination substitutions, where they take 2 units off the board and replace them with a combined unit. And so that Drina 2 division appears, and 2 other smaller brigades were removed from the map. Now, up in the far northwest, the 21st Division of the Austro-Hungarian Army, now 5 hexes behind the lines, away from the enemy as a requirement, are now seeking to recover their combat effectiveness levels. They have to spend 9 movement points to do so, which they can add up from turn to turn. And they can simultaneously take on replacements from those marsh replacements just next to them there. And again, that takes up movement points. So they're back up to full strength, but still have a reduced combat effectiveness level, and they'll sit there trying to recover those points. Now the Austrians on their turn, again get quite ambitious, and again try to attack those Serbians holding against the Sava River. Once again, they launch what they think is going to be a pretty strong attack. They're bringing these units, all of, I think, the 8th Corps together to attack those Serbians. Now, they don't have enough movement points because of the shifting away, don't have enough movement points to all launch a planned attack, so it is just a normal attack launched during the combat phase. Unfortunately, once again, this goes pretty poorly for the Austro-Hungarians. They're struggling to make much of a headway here. You can see over to the right, the 32nd Division of that 4th Corps have moved up against the Sava. They're considering crossing and suffering a penalty just to get that flanking bonus on those defenders. But elsewhere, a lot of those Austrian units have suffered combat effectiveness level reductions. If you compare this to the Serbians, this is the third and the second corps. The cavalry has suffered one level reduction due to a forced march failure, but otherwise they haven't suffered many reductions at all and are looking quite healthy. And finally, the Serbians, just to put salt in the wound, launch a counterattack on those Austro-Hungarians there and force them to retreat one space, but they don't advance into that hex. They don't want to expose that Morava's 2nd Division to being surrounded again by the Austro-Hungarians, so they pretty much just sit where they are, looking pretty happy. And that brings us to the end of game turn 3. You can see here on the game turn record track, game turn 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then we have this interface. And during the interface, basically both players incorporate the allotment of replacements, so they can begin to rebuild their forces, and they can record new improved positions that they're allowed to build. Now in the game turn 0 to 3, you're not allowed to build improved positions. From this interface onwards, each side will get an allowance with which they can begin to effectively entrench on the field. So hopefully that's given you an idea of how the sort of scenario plays out. What I haven't really discussed at length is supply considerations. Now you can see on that map the position of both the supply depots and supply trains for each of the corps, and these are important considerations that you're always going through. You can't move your units too far from those supply trains or depots. You're always thinking about the allocation of divisions to each corps. If you're thinking about moving a corps to a certain area, a formation to a division to a certain area, you need to think about what corps they'll be part of, and thus during the allotment phase you might want to consider reallotting that division. You're thinking it's a very good solo game because you're always thinking about where you can attack, but there are always these unknown factors. What assets might lie below the formation, and how intensely will the attacker or defender fight? Will the defender put up an intense fight, and does the attacker risk suffering some strength losses in the combat, or should the attacker fight intensely and try and force the defender to retreat? All of this lends itself quite well to solo play. There's this a little bit of fog of war surrounding what's going on under those counters. And indeed, there's so many supply considerations to make. Supply can't be stretched too far over mountain regions, so you've got to be very careful moving through there. It can go through roads through mountain regions, which is why those Austro-Hungarian units in the southwest are at the end of a short road network. So again, hopefully you've gained an understanding. It is available from G&T Games, and it is part of that broader 1914 series. And the other games, from what I understand, play very similarly. There are only a couple of variations in the rules from game to game. That's 1914 Serbien Muss Sterbien by Resch.